education and lived citizenship among the ghetto youth in Kampala-Uganda. And I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Milcah's supervisors. And Milcah is a very lucky student because she had 3 professors supervising her. So Milcah, you're very, very lucky. So her supervisors were Professor Godfrey, Berinde, Asiimwe, who is with us in the room. You're welcome, Prof. Professor Asiimwe is a professor of development studies, who was with us here in Makerere, but has since moved on to Mountains of the Moon University. And we are happy to have you back today, Professor Asiimwe. Her second supervisor is Associate Professor Robert Senath Esuruku, also in development studies. And Professor Esuruku was with us until about 2 months or less, about 2 months ago, when he also left Makerere University and moved on to Muni University. He's not able to join us physically today because of the assignments that he has at his new place of work. But I believe that he's with us in spirit, and maybe when he finds time, he'll be able to join online. And the third supervisor is Professor Amanda Hammar from the University of Copenhagen. Professor Amanda should be online. Professor Amanda, are you there? She was okay. So anyway, she could have been waiting, and since we're starting a little bit late, but she'll be joining us online. So I would now like to introduce the panelists. We have Dr. Rachel Dungu, who is online because she's out of campus today. And Dr. Dungu, you can confirm to us. But Farouk can also, she's online. Okay, great. Then we have Professor Veneranda Mbabazi, who is with us in the room. Dr. Muhammad Lunyago from Makerere Institute of Social Research. Of course, I forgot to introduce my professor. Professor Mbabazi is the head of Department of Religion and Peace Studies. We're actually in her territory. So yes, this is her territory. This corridor here, she could try to block it and we don't get out of here. And Dr. Isaac Tivasima, ITK, from the Department of Literature. And lastly, we have Dr. Resti Naiga, who is doubling as panelist, but she's also the head of Department of Development Studies. Colleagues, I welcome you and I thank you for taking time and making time to read the candidates' work and to join us here for the defense. Our critical reader today is Dr. Herman Butime from the Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Makerere University. Dr. Butime, you're very welcome, and we are honored to have you. We have our Secretariat, Ms. Florence Birabwa, who is our school registrar. And of course, we have our own Professor Farouk, who makes sure that everything in this room is in order and that we can have a successful blended defense. So I want to turn to Milcah and welcome you to the podium. and you will have up to 35 minutes to take us through your presentation. Farouk will project the time there, so when you run out of the 35 minutes, probably he'll give you 5 more minutes, and that takes you up to 40. I'm not saying run and don't breathe, but I just want you to know that you have to work within a certain time. And thereafter, the opponent will have up to 60 minutes, critical engagement between the opponent and candidate for 60 minutes. And then the panelists will have 30 minutes. And then the panelists retreat for 20 minutes. Oh, yeah, we also have 10 minutes for the public to ask questions. So, yes, of course, I forgot to introduce myself again. So my name is Pamela Hanakwa. I am the Dean of the School of Liberal and Performing Arts, and I'll be chairing this defense. Please join me to welcome the candidate to take us through her work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Milcah Abasabyona, as already introduced, and for the past 4 years, I've worked on this research under the topic, Intimacies of Identification and Lived Citizenship among the Ghetto Youth. This project was supported by Danida Fellowship Center and then Citizens as a project, and supervised by Professor Godfrey Asiimwe and Professor Amanda Hammar and Associate Professor Robert Senath Esuruku. This is my presentation outline, and to begin with, the research was guided by an overarching question of how do contemporary forms of legal identification in Uganda shape citizenship, belonging, and personhood. And what motivated this research? I drew my motivation from both the past and current debates around difficulties or challenges towards full enjoyment of citizenship rights, especially among the vulnerable groups of people in urban periphery spaces, such as the ghetto youth, my case, and particularly the mismatch between what legal citizenship in form of documentation promises and what actually happens in reality. The challenges that a certain category or group of people experience even when they are legal citizens but not documented or legally recognized, but also those who are non-citizens but ought to be under the protection of the state, as our constitution states. And also, I had reasons for picking out on the ghetto youth as my key study population, but also the Kampala slums. Now, if I may speak to the Kampala slums, why? Kamocha in particular is one of the biggest, is the biggest of the 5 divisions that make up Kampala city, with about 16,020 people, according to UBOS statistics of 2024. And this space is youth dominated, and it is made up specifically Kamocha 2, because Kamocha is split into 2. There is Kamocha 1 and Kamocha 2, which is often referred to as the ghetto, and it is made up of 10 impoverished zones. So I focused on this division because it represents the face of urban marginality. Looking at the poverty and looking at the service delivery vis-a-vis what legal citizenship promises. And also the fact that this marginal space is right at the center of Kampala city. And also being looked at as the ghetto, actually in everyday discourse. When I conducted my, I would call it feasibility study or preliminary field before going for actual field, I also discovered that actually it is considered as the commanding center for all the ghettos across the country. So that was a bit intriguing for me. The base or the home for all the ghettos. It is a politically charged space at the center of the national politics due to the emergence of a new figure who is known as Bobi Wine. And this figure is closely associated with the ghetto. And he appeals mostly to the youth. So that also contributes to why. And also, Kamocha, when you look at it, it's as though it's an amalgamation point for all people from all walks of life. So for me, it would provide the sample as appropriate as expected. So here is the map, though not so well like visible, but I extracted the 10 zones that make up Kamocha 2 slum area, where I focused, as you can see them right next to the map. And why I put up the map is because I also looked at a space which is at the boundary between Kamocha and Kawempe, referred to as no man's land. In the government gazette, KCCA Gazette, it is considered to be part of Baise, but the people who reside there look at that space as no man's land and they crisscross the boundaries. So for them, they think or they say they belong to Kamocha Ghetto. So I just wanted to highlight the space that I was mentioning about. Okay, yes, right here at Kisenyi zone, which neighbors Baise, right here, there is a population. It is a whole long stretch of the valley. The history of that place, it used to be a valley that was reclaimed and people occupied it. And also the land tenure system is a problem, whereby they claim the land was given by the Kabaka, but then the government came in with the laws to protect environment, and it was put under the under NEMA. So the people who occupy this place here think they occupy no man's land, and it also has its implications. Problem statement. So here is the problem. Globally, different states or modern states have embraced legal IDs, mainly for the purpose of authenticating citizenship and then also to determine who belongs to the national territory, boundaries. Although there are other reasons such as security and others, as we shall see later on. However, this move, which came as a good one, has triggered inequalities and exclusions from citizenship entitlement for the vulnerable groups of people. It is on record that globally, quite a number of people, I think about 450 million people live without any form of legal recognition. And 50% of that lives on the African continent. So they have experienced negative repercussions that spill from this global trend of states embracing biometric legal IDs. And it depicts a mismatch between the promises tagged to legal documented citizenship and citizenship in practice, which I call lived citizenship in this study. So whereas the legal citizenship in form of documentation promises secure identity and national belonging, the vulnerable groups of people still face socio-economic and systemic barriers towards access to legal IDs. If we look at Uganda, for instance, there is quite a number of citizens that have not yet acquired the national ID. I can use the national ID as an example, due to different reasons. Some talk about the costs, others talk about corruption, and also there is some evidence, according to research, for instance, by the unwanted witness, that there are delays in the processing when one has registered for the ID, and other attendant reasons. So all these exemplify the disconnection between legal citizenship and citizenship as practiced in the everyday lives, especially of the marginalized. The main objective for this study was to explore how citizen certification and identification influence individuals' sense of belonging, the nature and quality of citizenship in terms of citizen-state relationship and personhood. This would be addressed by looking at specific objectives. My first objective was to explore the different key identification documents used by the ghetto youth in their everyday lives or day-to-day lives. The second objective was to capture individual experiences of legal identification and certification, plus their implications for citizenship among the ghetto youth. And the third was to examine the regulatory effects of identification documents on citizenship, belonging, and personhood among the ghetto youth. And finally, to trace the ways in which the undocumented ghetto youth create alternative routes to lived citizenship and self-certification. When I talk of the ghetto youth, I chose this word knowing of the negative connotations, but also privy of the context, the Ugandan context. If we try to look at the history of the ghetto itself, from the Venetian city in Italy, then right to other European cities, and then to America, and then globally. From the Venetian city, there were no many negative connotations because it was basically looked at as the Jewish, the Jewish closed quarters, where the Jews that ran away from the war as waged by the Roman Empire, I think, yes, would be put separately, not to contaminate the culture. That's according to some scholars. But later, the ghetto was infiltrated with the political, social, economic, different views, and it evolved from just a place where the Jews used it to live to attract negative connotations such as poverty-stricken, as a place where the immigrants would be put, and then for American ghettos related to the Black Americans and their, fight for freedom. Even in Africa, in like South African apartheid, the ghettos were looked at as the segregated, urban settlements for purely blacks. But what comes out as common in all the different ghettos is the segregation of a particular group and marginalization of people. So even with our own Ugandan ghetto, if I come back to our context, there is that component of marginalization of the people who live in the ghetto, especially to the society, peripheral spaces. But it is associated with these other components of politics, of economic exclusion, social exclusion, and so on and so forth. Theoretical framework. This research was grounded in lived citizenship as advanced by Khalil and others. And this lived citizenship theory focuses on the lived experiences of the people. It also acknowledges informal participation, owing to the fact that the ghetto itself is more of an informal space, because its context also talks about the historical segregation of and separation of the residential places during colonial time. So when this theory focuses on when it acknowledges and embodies the informal participation, then it brings on board the people who occupy informal spaces and operate informally within the public domain. And this lived citizenship provides a framework which is spatiality. The spatiality fronts the idea that citizenship cannot be studied outside its context, that the context is very important. So while studying, to look at space, and space is looked at in terms of territory, but also in terms of relational. To say within space, there are certain, there is an interplay of relations, of people and things going on. Then there is also subjectivity. So the subjectivity looks at citizenship, rather intersubjectivity, looks at citizenship, that it must be studied also in relation to it can look at the subject of it can be studied across space and time. Yes. And then the performed looks at the actions and practices. And the affective considers citizenship as deeply emotional, that it attaches feelings. Then I also looked at differentiated citizenship, and the differentiated citizenship considered the liberal, the communitarian, and the civic republic theories. The aim was to look at how citizenship as a concept has evolved over time to reach at a point where there is coexistence of legal notions of citizenship alongside the lived or substantive citizenship practices. So the liberal looks at citizenship as rights given by the state, or rights, duties, responsibilities that are all given by the state and protected by the same. And it draws from Marshall's own definition that looks at the state as a community. So all who are part of the community, legally recognized, and who have the status are equal before the law. The communitarian came up because of the gaps in the liberal, because the liberal could not recognize community as part of what forms identities. So the communitarian looks at a citizen as a socially embedded individual whose identity is conferred by the community. And then the civic republic actually merges the two, what the liberal fronts and the communitarian. My research methodology. This research, my philosophical orientation is social constructivism. And in social constructivism, it is believed that there are multiple truths, apparent to different individuals. Every individual mind processes information differently, so our truth varies. Why it was important for me to employ lived citizenship theory, to go out and find try to understand the everyday experiences of different people from their own perspectives in relation to the ID documents. And the design was qualitative, basically exploratory. Why I talk of ethnography, because ethnography sometimes different scholars write about it differently. It passes as a design but also as a methodology. And in this case, the design being exploratory, I looked at ethnography as the best methodology or method to delve into this research, because it allows the use of different data collection methods that will help you get into the realities of the people that you are studying. And I thought and knew that this would help me gain a deeper insights into the everyday lived experiences and practices of the ghetto youth in relation to the legal identification systems and in particular documents. The approach still remains qualitative. The study area, Kampala slums, Kamocha and Bwaise, I already spoke about that and why they were selected. Methods, the participant observation, where I had the observation checklist, of course, but this was mainly to point at which place are you going to be for this observation, which people, and what is going to be observed. And all these other listed methods, life stories, focus group, and all that. And then the participants, the primary target was the ghetto youth between age of 8 to 30, documented and undocumented, but also non-citizens. And then I also had key informants as they are listed, the police chairpersons, the counselors, and okay. And the sampling techniques, I used purposive sampling, random sampling, and chain referral, which sometimes is referred to as snowballing. Data was analyzed thematically, but I also used the Vivo 14 qualitative data analysis tool, especially for coding. This thesis is arranged in 3 themes. Each theme is covered by different objectives. Citizenship is covered by all the 4 objectives. Personhood is covered by the 3rd and 4th objective. And belonging is also covered by all objectives. So I have put up this just to show the different areas that I drew on in explaining these different themes. Findings. On the citizenship theme, the key findings were that there is a different interpretation and meanings attributed to nation, rather to citizenship. One as nation building, especially when you look at it in terms of legal documentation, because of the empowering components of the ID, such as the requirement for the ID to access Youth Livelihood Fund. And then vis-a-vis the struggle, for those who cannot be neatly categorized within the legal framework, or those who cannot access the ID documents, call citizenship a struggle. Actually, the Ghetto Youth had a common phrase. They would say, tulimu struggle. And sometimes when it is used, it attracts political connotations, but they use it overall to show the struggles in the social, political, and economic arenas. Legal formal citizenship, I looked at it within the context of the Ugandan constitution. And then the localized meanings of citizenship came up as Omutuze, which means a resident citizen, Omunansi, a national citizen, and Omutaka, who was referred to as the son of the soil. The IDs are important, but not a necessary condition for lived citizenship. That was according to the respondents. That is, all ghetto youth consider themselves citizens. Documented or not, they still consider themselves citizens. And they also have key attributes for a good citizen as participation, concern for others, agency, and community belongingness or membership. Legal IDs manifest as threats and opportunities for the ghetto youth, those who have them and those who do not. And the hierarchies of legal IDs, in a sense that the national ID has been placed up there in relation to other IDs. This has rendered other IDs, existing IDs, as of less importance. The key IDs, according to the first objective, were, according to the first objective, used in the ghetto, were all the listed up, but the most important ones that they use almost on a daily basis was the national ID, which is also referred to as Ndangamuntu, and the resident ID or village cards that are issued by the LC1 authority. And then there were challenges, bureaucracy, like bureaucratic hurdles whereby you are required to sign form after form, and then you are required to go to the GSO, and some of these youth have never been to school, they are illiterate, they don't even know how to fill the forms, so they find it problematic, and there is the social stigma attached to that. There were claims of corruption, constrained resources, and yet it is resource intensive, lack of awareness, system errors, and poor data management. And of course, the opportunities, job prospects, access to public and private services, access to other important documents, especially for the national ID, which is a foundational document, but it is also a functional document. And I have a small quotation from one of the youth who is undocumented. He said, "Myself, I am a document. I did not get education, so I don't deal with documents, IDs, and papers. There are many youth without what they do, so he wakes up, mingles with friends, tags along to do short-term deals, as long as they find what to eat." So this is a voice of not compliance, but of contestation. So this means that in the legal identification process, there are also contestations and negotiations. And the implications of the hierarchies, the classification and categorization of citizens into deserving, the less deserving, and undeserving categories. Changing notions of citizenship to embody both the substantive citizenship by claiming rights that they feel they deserve, but also the political citizenship, which is also called legal citizenship. IDs act to sort citizens and police those with suspicious behavior those commonly referred to as bayaye in the urban peripherals. IDs act as protection device against physical violence and by state agents such as the police, army, the ESO, and they are looked at as surveillance tools. Citizens learn to deal with these threats in different ways. That is where I talk about negotiations and contestations. So the contestations are socio-economic and political maneuvers, and they include camouflage, outright denial, deliberate invisibility, and representation, self-representation and certification, such as when one says I'm a foot soldier, what does that imply in the legal identification realm? The tattoos and the body markings, are they for any reason? The dress code. And then the negotiations come in form of bribery, brokering, joining local solidarity groups, and the waithood, accepting that for us to receive anything from the state, we must wait. We are the underprivileged, so we must wait. The language factor. Language factor, I project it independently because it passes both as a tool of contestation, but also a tool of negotiation. So there I show the common ghetto slangs, such as what you see, the police, and this is contextual. When they say njama, enjama, obsaja, embizi, they use it in different contexts as they try to navigate, their survival mostly. Then weed, and when you look at these words used here, they can also paint a broader picture of the kind of society and what maybe happens on the daily basis. Things like HIV being called John or Embra, a rich person, Kanege, Yo, and all that. But I have a quotation from the self-proclaimed ghetto president, but who is now contesting for the presidency of the state. He said, this in my view, that was about the national ID. This in my view is not to give anybody a sense of identity. No, it is a curtailing effort to make sure they are watching you every day. And also to extract money from the citizens. Because why would a citizen have to pay 50K or more to have a national ID? It is a good idea for the citizens to have a national ID. It is supposed to be free. It should be timeless because there is not going to be a time when I cease to be a citizen of Uganda. Unless if they cancel my citizenship, but they can't. I am here. I am a citizen by birth. So there is urgency in that voice. Belonging is the second theme. And this was looked at as belonging to multiple scales, underlined by the question of how contemporary forms of legal ID shape notions of belonging and not belonging among the ghetto youth. So belonging is a component of citizenship and personhood, an expanded form of participation in self-identification and citizen-making processes. So this means that one can belong to multiple scales, can belong to macro, micro, or meso. And when we talk of, well, I don't know if I have time to explain this. Belonging to the state is also another form of belonging, which translates to legal identification. Belonging to the state translates to legal identification, certification, and recognition. And this, of course, implies that you can either belong or not belong, showing the inclusion and exclusions. And then belonging to systems of power. The ID is looked at as a tool for state power. It is used for different things. So when you have registered for an ID, a national ID, and acquired it, it is also looked at as having some form of power as a citizen. And then personhood was the last one, the third of the themes. that looked at the perceptions of self and how personhoods are constructed or deconstructed in the social cultural spaces of the ghetto. So the personhood looked at the different humanizing experiences that the ghetto youth, especially the undocumented, go through, such as the arrests, the torture, imprisonment, and limited mobility, denial of service, violence that is meted on them when they are found without IDs. The lack of IDs overall negatively impacts on personhoods, because personhood can be looked at in a formal but also the informal, the relational. Conclusion. I conclude by saying that after analyzing my data and all the outcome, that active participation of marginalized groups in everyday acts of citizenship reshapes the relationship between citizens and the state by framing citizenship as an ongoing negotiation of power, because we see power relations at play all through. The state is viewed not just as a provider of rights, but as a site of contestation where the vulnerable and marginalized citizens employ multiple strategies like camouflage to assert personhood and claim rights. And meaningful and inclusive citizenship goes beyond documentation. It requires popular mobilization to pressure, transform and redefine the state power beyond conventional legal notions of rights, provision, and identity fixing in form of legal identification by the state. Contributions. Scholarly, the notion of chameleon citizen comes up. Who is a chameleon citizen? It shows how legal identification and certification practices affect the relationship between citizens and the state in terms of accountability and power. But this citizen, a chameleon citizen, consciously employs camouflage, changing their behaviors, expressions, and sometimes affiliations to avoid detection and persecution. They are neither in opposition nor compliant, but adopt a flexible stance to create space for active citizenship. Their main traits, you look at the modifying outward expressions to suit particular contexts. Their actions are driven by the desire for survival and personal safety. They are evasive in nature. They seek to influence or participate in social processes indirectly, such as when the ghetto youth create proxy accounts. And they often use coded acts and language, like I already projected, to evade authoritarian scrutiny. They use, particularly in the ghetto, when it comes to language, they use what they call ruluyaye in the ghettos. And also this is accompanied by some signs and symbols. The recommendations. I recommend to enhance the accessibility, affordability, and user-friendliness of the national identification processes by employing mobile and community-based registration centers in marginalized urban areas and slums. And this has worked elsewhere in Africa, such as in Cote d'Ivoire. So I hope and believe that if Uganda adopts the same strategy, a number of excluded youth would also be included finally. To reduce the financial costs associated with obtaining IDs, and this would be by implementing free or subsidized ID registration and issuance programs. And finally, the alternative identification mechanisms to also be institutionalized in order to avoid reliance on the national ID as the only ID and all-in-one that is required by a Ugandan citizen to be able to enjoy his or her full citizenship rights. Further research areas. This study did not explore in depth how undocumented individuals navigate mobility challenges such as cross-border movement and the social integration. So further scholarly inquiry needs to be done in order to, understand the influence of contemporary legal identification regimes on individual mobility, especially looking at even the vertical mobility, the economic advancement or economic progression among the vulnerable groups of people. But also I thought about a possibility of investigating the role of corruption, because corruption emerged as a serious issue, and the systemic inequalities in shaping access to identification and public identification and public services can provide critical insights into the impact of citizen sense of belonging and the state-citizen relations. These so far the publications out of the work, and I say thank you for listening and for attending this. So I have acknowledgements, and I'd like to thank the citizens and the NIDA for funding this study, Makerere University for giving me an opportunity to study from this mighty institution, especially Youth and Development Studies Department in particular, my supervisors, the mentors, doctoral committee members. I'll not mention names, but I'm really greatly indebted for all the work you put and the support. I thank my PhD peers on this journey and the Citizens Project, but also within the confines of Makerere University and beyond. I also thank Copenhagen University for the two-time opportunity as a visiting scholar, because that shaped the way I think about my work, or I thought about my work to this day. PRIO, that is the Peace and Research Institute, Oslo. This offered me a course on international human rights, and it helped me a lot, especially looking into our constitution to pick out, to tease out the gaps. Then next, Jane Social Science Research Council, that partly funded my field work and also the research process, supported some workshops. And finally, I would like to thank my family members. I'll not mention names, but I'm really grateful for all the support. Thank you, and thank you once again.
Thank you, Milcah, for taking us through your work. We are now waiting for engagement with the critical reader, who stepped out briefly, but he will be back. So just take it easy, take some water as we wait for him to come. Yes. Okay, Milcah, do you want to sit or to stand? Farouk, can she sit or she has to stand? So you can move and sit here, but you can also stand wherever you're most comfortable.
Good morning. Chair, thank you for Good morning, Milcah. Thank you for your presentation and congratulations on your doctoral journey thus far. Your topic is interesting and important. I hope in the next 60 minutes we shall have an interesting interaction. Now, I will begin our interaction by focusing on your abstract. Your abstract has all the essential components. You unveil the gap in knowledge, the research questions that you pursued, your methods, the theories that spurred your research, and your findings. Now, in terms of the gap, you're very explicit in your abstract in mentioning that there is a gap between the promise of legal citizenship, which the Republic of Uganda promises on one hand, and on the other, national identification stratifying citizenry into those who are deserving, those who are less deserving, and those who are undeserving. So building on that research gap, you then ask the grand question: how do the youths in the ghettos of Kamocha and Boise navigate formal citizenship? Because your assumption is that they are not able to have formal citizenship. So as a response, they are pushed to navigate informal citizenship. Now, the methods are essentially anchored in ethnography, and in your abstract, you state that your study is based on what you call differentiated and lived citizenship. And you have just shared with the audience your key findings, which I'm not going to repeat. Now, generally, the abstract is well written, though I think there are two things missing, and which I would like you to briefly state. Number one, what is the theoretical significance of your study? Does your study support or dismiss the theories that you used? And very, very briefly, I want you to tell me that. And then secondly, is there any contribution your study makes towards research methodology? And again, very briefly, because we have a lot to go through. But otherwise, in terms of the abstract as written, I think it was done very well. But I just want you to briefly tell us the contribution, the theoretical contribution your study makes, and if there is also a methodological contribution, very briefly.
Well, thank you for that question. I'll start by saying that my study is an exploratory study. So the intention for me was not actually to like create a new theory, but the theoretical framework was to help me, like it helped me to anchor my study, like to be able to explain, tease out, bring out new knowledge to the field of citizenship and maybe development. But also when you talked about the theory right now, it occurred to me that my study partly contributes to the theory of intimacies of identification that is not yet in existence, but looking at the different research that has been conducted, especially at the intimate level, I would say. I'm sorry to use the same, I can't find the right word. My study in itself brings out clearly the distinction between legal framework of citizenship and the lived or practiced aspect of it within the context of identification.
Okay, thank you very much, Milcah, because we need to move on. Maybe if I may help you, in your last chapter,
Yes.
you do mention that the fundamental contribution that your study makes towards scholarship is the idea of chameleon citizenship.
Yes.
So if that's your position in your conclusion, then it should have a reflection or a place in your abstract.
Oh,
Very briefly. So I think that should be captured.
Okay.
Okay, so I would like us then to move on to chapter 1, which is your introduction. And I will begin by talking about the structure of this chapter, and then comment on how well you did in assembling it, and then where the shortcomings were. Now, in terms of the structure of chapter 1, you have three major parts in this chapter.
Yes.
So the first part alerts us to what you call the nation state as an entity at the center of the debate around citizenship. So the first part of that chapter deals with that. And then the second one, you differentiate between the formal and the informal citizenship. And then the third part of the chapter operationalizes the idea of the ghetto. Okay? Now, if I may begin with the first part of this chapter, where you position the nation state as the dominant political community, where membership of that community is determined in form of citizenship. So you state that in the first part of this chapter. Then the second part, you address the issue of intimacy in the matter of citizenship. And from the literature you reviewed, intimacy is personal and emotional in matters of citizenship. Then the third part of the chapter deals with the distinction between formal citizenship and substantive citizenship. And you do enumerate the different paths that lead to formal citizenship, i.e. birth, registration, naturalization, etc. Now, that's done very well, and then you move into the zone where you operationalize the ghetto. And you clearly, from the literature you reviewed, you mentioned that the ghetto is three things:
Yes.
space, place, and people. So place meaning location, people meaning those in
Yes.
the location, but also who inhabit and interact within
Yes.
the space. So I found that very useful for whoever is reading your work. And then you also move into distinguishing between the ghetto and the slum. And from the literature you reviewed, both ghetto and slum are underpinned by destitution and exclusion.
Yes.
But what differentiates ghetto from slum is segregation. And maybe that's why I'll also have to ask whether what we call the ghettos are a product of segregation, because that's what differentiates ghettos from slums, the Jewish ghettos, the Italian ghettos, etc. Okay, but also what's very instructive about your review is you cite the works of Wakwe Yant, 1991, who asserts that the phenomenon of the ghetto is fluid.
Yes.
It's dynamic, it's not static. So overall, I think this chapter is well written. My only challenge with it is your conceptualization of the concept nation state, because in the preliminary parts of this chapter you mentioned that legal citizenship is something that nation states do. But if I may inform you, from an international relations point of view, there are very few nation states in the world. And by nation states, I mean political communities with single nationalities. There aren't very many. Okay? So what you really technically have are states. You don't have very many nation states. Or else, how else do you understand a nation state? Very briefly.
A nation state, I understand it as one that has both. Okay, I understand it as one that has both the components of the systems of power, but also the unified common heritage. For instance, in Uganda, Uganda is called a nation state, not necessarily because we all speak the same language, but it can be traced, the origin of the state can be traced to the colonial demarcation of the boundaries, and that is what we share. And even with our different cultures or language and ethnicity, but we have that which we share in common, which is our heritage, that Uganda was demarcated across these borders, and we were put in within the territory, and the nation was born. So that is my understanding.
Okay, now just to inform you, Milcah, the concept nation state appears at the time of the Treaty of Westphalia, where
yes,
in
Westphalia,
Europe,
yes,
you have an attempt by the statesmen of Europe to bring an end to the endless wars, and the idea of a nation state is mooted as one where you have a political community defined by territory, population, and most importantly, sovereignty. Okay, but the idea of a nation state is you have a state where you have a single or a singular nation. So we don't have that phenomenon. So my advice is you're safer sticking to state, because the nation state will run you into a number of conceptual problems. Okay? Accepted or rejected? You're free to reject.
I'll
This is
contemplate on it and
okay.
yes.
Thank you very much. Now quickly, the problem statement is well laid out, and I think you did that competently in your presentation. You told us how there is a mismatch between citizenship in theory and citizenship in practice. Though what I found odd is that in your work you tell us that 20% of Ugandans don't have national IDs, and my assumption is some of those are in the rural areas. So why focus on the urban and not the rural? Very briefly, Milcah.
No, the urban. Oh yes, and this 20% that I quoted, that it constitutes the most vulnerable. And when you look at the space or the place that was selected for my study in the urban, it constitutes almost the most vulnerable, who may not even be living up to the standards of the rural people. But also the reason behind was, if I went out, for instance, to a place in the remote place, like in the remote Uganda, to do this study, I would not be able to come up with all the different constituted categories of the respondents or participants that I got. The rural Uganda, it will be difficult for you to find the non-citizens within the same space as documented and undocumented, but also with different vulnerabilities. Because Uganda, I think, is in such a way that people of the same culture, of the same, share the rural places. If it is a village, for instance, or a sub-county district, in most cases you will find people who speak the same language, who are not so heterogeneous, like what you find within the urban.
Okay, thank you very much, Milcah. I will inform you that in chapter 2 you have an answer. You had the answer in chapter 2 which you didn't utilize to plug that gap. Okay, so I will then move on to chapter 2, and then I'll show you where the answer is provided by you. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 2. And chapter 2 essentially has 3 major parts. Now, in the first, you draw a distinction between legal citizenship and lived citizenship. Then that neatly then feeds into the theories of citizenship, which is the second part of the chapter. And then in the third part, you operationalize the key concepts of your study, that is belonging, yes, identification, yes, and personhood. And then in the last part is where you have the answer to the question I asked. So in the first part of that last part, you discuss the state in the matter of citizenship, and then in the final one, you discuss the matter of urban citizenship. Urban citizenship. So your work on urban citizenship should have provided the answer to that. But very briefly now, let me go into what you do in terms of chapter 2. So in chapter 2, you draw a very elaborate distinction between legal and lived citizenship. And you draw on the works of Marshall, 1950, who essentially provides insights into citizen rights. And then you also engage with the works of Bobak, Haywood, and Stromquist, who underline the notion of equality in citizenship and also the idea of a contract. And then you end with Godilo, 2006, who posits the idea of the state as an entity with control over her citizens through the idea of certification. Now, you then, after discussing formal citizenship, you then move on to the stage where you unpack lived citizenship. And here you draw on the works of Jones and Gachenta 2020, and then McKeown 2005. But what is even more instructive, and I think you did enumerate that in your presentation, is providing the 4 dimensions of citizenship, and that is speciality, intersubjectivity, performed, and affective, which you do very well. So your distinction between the 2 types of citizenship feeds neatly into your discussion on the theories, that is liberal citizenship, communitarian or pluralist citizenship, and civic republicanism. Upon reading your work, I realized that at the end of the day, you narrowed down to communitarian pluralism. So I wonder why you don't explicitly state that in your abstract, that your study was principally anchored on communitarian / pluralist citizenship. So I think it would help your abstract. You unpack belonging and identification and personhood competently. And finally, in that chapter, you discuss the matter of urban citizenship. You trace the evolution of the idea of citizenship back to the city-states. Yes. Okay, so before there was the thinking that you could extend this citizenship to the rural, yes, it was something that was the preserve of the urban. So I felt that should have been captured in your abstract, rather in your problem statement. Agreed or disagreed? Agreed. You can't disagree. You admit you are guilty as accused. Yes. So Milcah, let's move on then to chapter 3, where you unveil your methods and you tell the reader how you identified your field site, how you constructed your field, how you identified your actors, the rationale for employing ethnography, the data collection methods you used, how you accessed the field, the challenges you faced, how you selected respondents, your positionality in the study, limitations, data processing, and ethical consideration. I think you do a fairly good job. Actually, this is one of the most in-depth methodological chapters I have read in a while, and for that I commend you. You really expended quite a bit of intellectual effort in justifying your methods. Candidates often spend less time on methods, but I think you did a very, very good job in that regard. But that's not to say that there were no shortcomings, which I'm going to. Number one, why you don't begin by rationalizing your philosophical foundation. Why does your philosophical foundation appear midway the chapter and not at the beginning? I thought you begin with the philosophy before you go into theory and then into the empirics and methods. So why didn't you begin with that? Secondly, and again you'll have to educate me because I'm not an expert on ethnography, I want to read 2 excerpts taken from your works, one by you and the other by a scholar you quote. And then you tell me who is lying to the other. Okay? Now this is you. My initial fieldwork approach involved carrying a recorder, notebook, and pen to document observations in the form of field notes. I hope that's you, and I haven't fabricated. Okay? Now, listen to a scholar you quote, Emerson and others, 2011. Field researchers take mental notes of certain detailed impressions which remain as head notes until the researcher sits down at some later point to write full notes about these scenes and events. Kindly reconcile that contradiction, Milcah.
Well, I'll basically say it's not a contradiction. I would say it's not a contradiction because field notes are taken differently. It just depends on the context and where, what, and the ethics. You put the ethical considerations into play. So at sometimes you may just be a passive observer. For example, when you talk about participant observation, you may just be observing and not taking part in what is happening. So in that case, you have a chance, as long as you have communicated properly prior to the activity to the people or the things, okay, where you are observing, as long as you have sought for their permission to observe. You may sit right there and then take notes observe, and write whatever you think is important for your field work. But also there is active, observation, where you are actively involved. It's a method of data collection. You are observing, but at the same time you are taking part, and you may not have time to write. So in that case, you use your mental recording. You observe as you participate. I'll give an example of field. I participated in some of the activities at Kamocha Youth Center, the board games basically, because it's a center designed to help the ghetto youth engage in different sport games, but they also have board games. And I was at some point allowed to take part, even as I observed. So in that case, you cannot be playing a board game and you are writing notes at the same time, but you observe as you're participating, and thereafter, immediately, as soon as you get to a convenient place, you write all the notes.
Okay, thank you very much, Milcah. My concern in regard to note taking, and again, I will confess I'm not an expert on ethnography, is the potential for unsettling your research settings, making your respondents nervous. But again, I think I'll not comment in depth on that, because I am not an expert on ethnography. But overall, I think you do very well in assembling your methods. There are just a few things that you need to correct in order to arrive at a better section of methodology. Okay, so let's move on then, Milcah, on to the fourth chapter of your thesis, which deals with the issue of the ghetto and identification. So this part of your dissertation has three main sections. So you have the first one that deals with the evolution of Kampala city, and then you have the second that addresses the evolution of slums in Kampala, and then in the third you conceptualize the concept of Bayaye, and then within that same part you unpack Bwaise and Kamocha in terms of what these places are, and then you end with what you call the contemporary legal identification documents that apply to this part of Kampala. Now, I'm not going to go into the evolution of Kampala and the evolution of the slums, because you have elaborated those aspects of your thesis. I will specifically focus on your connection of the political upheavals and social unrest in the country, your connection of that to the phenomenon of to the matter of citizenship. And why I point this out is that within your discussion, you address the broader crisis of the youth. You move away from what could have been the narrow focus on the crisis in these marginalized areas, and then you move away from that focus, and then you get into the broader focus of the youth crisis in the country. And why I'm saying this is, you, for example, connect the evolution of the following groups. You attempt to connect the evolution of the following groups, which I'm going to enumerate. Kikosi Maalum,
Yes.
State Research Bureau, Chiboko Squad, Black Mamba, Special Investigation Unit, Kireka, etc. So you suggest, your analysis would seem to suggest that the lack of formal citizenship by the youths is what gets some of them into joining these organizations, which I don't think is true. You have specific political developments in the country that lead to the evolution of Kikosi Maalum. Kikosi Maalum was a component of the Uganda National Liberation Army that was involved in the overthrow of President Idi Amin. The others were FRONASA. So you had FRONASA, Kikosi Maalum, Save Uganda movement, and others. So in these organizations, you didn't have youths who had failed to obtain national identification joining these groups. I think the political climate during the 70s is what leads youths to join these groups, to engage in what was known as a liberation struggle. But even in these liberation struggles, you had older persons involved. Not everybody who was in Kikosi Maalum, Save Uganda movement, Front for National Salvation. Not everybody was a youth. You had people who were old. Okay, so it wouldn't be true to say that those who joined these organizations had failed to obtain formal citizenship. So what I'm actually saying is that with regard to this chapter, the reader will see you moving away from what should have been a targeted focus on the challenges that are inherent in the ghettos, to discussing the wider crisis that the youths have been facing over time. And in that mix, you also have probably a not well thrashed out understanding of the political dynamics that lead to the evolution of some groups. So I think there is some bit of polishing up that you would need to do. But anyway, let me hear from you.
Well, maybe to begin with is just to highlight the purpose. Okay, to highlight the purpose for that chapter, because that chapter is actually not an empirical analytical chapter like the others, like based on the objectives. That chapter was specifically put to provide context, the general context for the thesis. So I have already highlighted, like when you read through, you see how the ghettos came about, or the slums came about. And one of the reasons I point out is the rural-urban migration. And the reason behind that is always to find greener pastures. And the youth, throughout the thesis, I position them as vulnerable, that occupy marginal spaces. So they occupy this liminal space in life, even like towards the end of the thesis, I talk about it, whereby they are supposed to be looked at not as old, but also not as children, because they have already crossed the 18 gap age. So they are looked at as busybodies. That's how, what they used, the phrase they used from the field work. So when they come to the cities looking for opportunities, they occupy spaces that are affordable for them. And sometimes it becomes difficult to transition from that slum to another place. So they are always looked at as available to be used even in politics. So that is like the thread of argument, that different governments, ever since Uganda actually got independence, different governments have used the youth for political reasons. And they have reached a point, because here I look at identification, legal identification, but I also look at the social culture forms, whereby they are like individual identities. So what pushes the youth to join those different groups, even the Chikos Maroon, is now a form of identity. Like, I belong to this. And it is also, it shows the vulnerability of the youth as part of the context within which the thesis is being written. Their vulnerability to be used for different things.
Okay, thank you very much, Milcah, for clarity on that matter. I'll then beg that we move on to chapter 5, where now you begin showing the reader how the youths in the ghettos of Bwaise and Kamocha navigate the lack of formal citizenship. And again, I will begin by unpacking your structure. So in the first part of this chapter, you provide the reader with findings on legal citizenship. Okay, how legal citizenship is obtained in Uganda. Then in the second part, you then explain how the youths in Bwaise and Kamocha cope with the inability to have this formal citizenship. And then I think in the third part is where you then bring out the actual things that they do to navigate the lack of formal citizenship or certification. Yes. The lack of certification that would give these inhabitants of these places citizenship. Now in the first part of your 5th chapter, you're very clear in stating the different ways an individual can become Ugandan, yes, i.e. citizenship by birth, citizenship by registration, citizenship by adoption, and citizenship by naturalization. And you enumerate the challenges that the youths in these places face in attempting to obtain citizenship via these methods. Now, the very interesting one is when you now move to how they, or rather the youth's understanding of citizenship, or how they live their citizenship, and which I found very, very interesting. And what I particularly found interesting is how they conceptualize legal citizenship. So from their perspective, legal citizenship is important but not necessary. Yes. Okay, and that is something that you captured in your presentation. And very, very interesting in the sense how they understand necessary, the idea of legal citizenship being necessary. So for them, what's important for anyone in the ghetto is that you should be Omutuze, or a local resident, citizen. And it's very interesting how they coin it, a local resident citizen, Omutuze, or Omtaka, a son of the soil, born of that soil. Yes. So there's that connection between the being and the place. And then the Omunasi. I think the Omunasi is the one which comes closest to the formal. So they navigate these three. Sometimes they combine them, sometimes they have 2 of the 3, or 3 of the 3, or 1 of the 3. But for you to qualify to be a resident, not a resident really, a citizen of the ghetto, if I may give you a word, and this is mine and not yours, a ghettozen. So you shouldn't pick this, a ghettozen. Okay, if you had a citizen, now this is mine and not yours. I have a patent on it, a ghettozen. Okay, so you have to either be Mtuze, Mtaka, or Mnasi. But being Mtuze, Mtaka, or Mnasi comes with certain characteristics. Yes. Number 1, you have to self-represent, self-identify, but above all, drawing on equal neighbors' relational autonomy. you have to have solidarity with the community,
Yes.
which again links up with the theory of communitarian citizenship. Okay. Yeah, so you do very well in unpacking legal citizenship and legal citizen from the perspective of the dwellers of the ghetto, and then lived citizenship. Now, you then move on to show the specific methods or the specific things that the dwellers of the ghetto do to substantive citizenship. Number one, they self-identify by duplicating cards. Number two, they use the performing arts to assert themselves. Three, they use pseudonyms,
Yes.
aliases. Since you used the term insurgent citizenship, I then thought that they use nom de guerre. Nom de guerre are aliases that guerrillas use in order not to be identified. So this is something that I've just added, okay, but it was not in your literature. But they also do what you call chameleon citizenship. They are yellow in the on the outside. That's what you mentioned, but red on the inside.
Yes.
Okay. So I found that very interesting. So I don't think I have any issues with chapter 6 unless you have anything to add or to clarify briefly before we move on to chapter 6.
No, maybe if I give examples, but
Yeah, maybe you could if you want. This is your day.
because there's one you left
Your
out.
mic?
There's one you left out about self-representation. About self-representation, they also use tattoos like body marks.
No,
And
that's,
every-
that's
yes.
coming in the next one.
Oh, okay.
Any other? That one is coming next.
No, it is okay.
It's
Or
okay.
maybe also joining opposition politics
Okay.
as a way of like fighting back, but also claiming their rights. They use that. So according to most of them, by default, a ghetto youth should belong to opposition politics because of the injustices and the unfair treatment they go through on a daily basis. So, but the reality could be different. Though, from the different interviews I conducted, all the youth I spoke with, the interlocutors, I did not find one that would say I am authentically pro-government. That is where the idea of the chameleon citizen came in. They would tell you that, no, tuba tunonya amaja, you know, like we are looking for some cash. I can put on the yellow t-shirt, I can even dance for the president, but theirs is all about survival.
Okay, thank you very much, Milcah. Let's move on to the 6th chapter, where you now address the aspect of belonging. And the subtitle of this chapter, I don't know whether I've used the correct word, whether it's a subheading. Is it a subheading or a subtitle? I think I'll need Dr. ITK, our resident guru on English to educate me. But anyway, in chapter 6, you have a subheading that which I found quite striking, that for them belonging sometimes means not belonging.
Yeah, it was
So I found this quite a revelation that their understanding of belonging sometimes is that even when sometimes you don't belong, for you to belong
when you
sometimes might
belong,
mean
yes.
not belonging. So I found that quite striking. So chapter 6 is partitioned into about 4 sections. One where you address the matter of what does it mean to belong, to politically belong. And then number 2, how do they address the matter of self-identification? And then number 4, the value attached to the document, the national identification document. and then how they understand the ghetto, their conceptualization of the ghetto. Now, in regard to political belonging, and I think you have elaborated that just a few minutes ago, and even in your presentation, for them, the party that partly has its roots. Of course, I also would like to remind you that the emergence of NUP is a continuation of assertive opposition politics. That doesn't start with NUP, but it starts with I would actually mention that it starts with Alhaji Nasser Ntege Sebagala, with the creation of the Uganda Young Democrats. So that really begins the first phase of what you would call assertive opposition politics, and then that feeds into reform agenda, and then reform agenda feeds into the Forum for Democratic Change. So NUP is the latest installment in the evolution of assertive. So that's why I'm saying that the genesis of NUP partly has its roots, like you've mentioned, in the ghettos, but also partly in the trajectory, in the evolution of assertive of politics. If you carefully study the constituency or the base of this political organization, you'll see some similarities. Okay, you'd call that as you'd refer to that as assertive opposition politics. Okay, yeah. Actually, it even starts earlier with Michael Kagwa and the DP Mobilizers Group before you have Alhaji Nasser Ntege Sebagala emerging in the early 90s. Yeah. So you mentioned that for them belonging, NUP is equal to the political establishment.
Yes, actually.
Just a moment. You're going to have your time, Milcah, okay? So you have that part where you talk about what it means to politically belong. So for them, political belonging is synonymous with being associated with or belonging to NUP. That's one part of what you mentioned in your chapter. Then the second, you deal with the issue of self-identification, where belonging somewhere disqualifies you from belonging elsewhere. So there are very, very clear boundaries that are constructed in the matter of the ghetto. You're either with them or you're not with them. Okay? And then, of course, this also relates to, and then of course the third part of this chapter deals with the identification card. It is seen as an instrument of power in and it by itself, but that it doesn't, if you have it, it doesn't take you out of the ghetto. You might have it as something to identify you, but it doesn't give you the means to get out of the ghetto. Okay? Yeah, so I thought this part of the dissertation was handled competently in terms of how you reported your findings. So you wanted to share something just to beef up?
Yeah, I wanted to, yes, agree with you on the
not me, but
no, like on the history okay. Of the what can be termed as insurgent citizenship by Houston, the urban citizenship. But what is unique in this case is that there is that emotional connection that the party NUP was started by their own, one of the ghetto youth, who proclaims it up to this point. So that's why sometimes they dub it as their base, which is a nomenclature for home in the ghetto. So that is one unique thing that stands out, I think, when it comes to how the youth have been protesting, but also co-opted in the present politics. And yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Milcah. So let us then move on to chapter 7, where you address the matter of personhoods. And again, I found this quite an interesting part of your essay. You essentially partitioned this chapter. You partitioned this chapter into into 4 parts. One where you dealt with the matter of the document. The second, actually the way you deal with the matter of the document, the national identification document, and how it connects with self-identification.
Yes.
And then you have the second part that deals with the social identification, because social identification is key in this part of the world.
Space,
exactly.
Yes.
And then 3 is how they harness the two things that we've just mentioned to survive.
Yes.
Hence the evolution of the phenomena of kuyiya
Yes.
and kuyiriba. Okay, and I'm going to ask you how we move from kuyiya to kuyiriba. Okay, from my rudimentary understanding, kuyiriba is a higher form of kuyiya. But again, I want to hear from you in greater detail. And then finally, in the last part, you have you focus on the body.
Yes.
Because for them, you have the body and the soul. And now the body is a temple for self-expression.
Yes.
And this self-expression can be defiant or it could be compliant. And they keep moving, gravitating from defiance to compliance. But what I want to know from you is in this chapter, aside from the how we move from kuyiya to kuyiriba, there is somewhere in your chapter where you mentioned that the ghetto is an equalizer. The ghetto is an equalizer where both the rich and the poor are vulnerable. I want you to elaborate on that.
Yes.
And then also elaborate on how in Luyaye, if we take Luyaye to be a sub-dialect, how do we move from kuyiya to kuyiriba? Okay, very briefly, because we are, I think, yeah.
So about moving from kuyiya to kuyiriba, first and foremost, maybe talk about kuyiya. Those are multiple endeavors that people engage in to make a do for survival. Different scholars have written about it, like Jeremy Jones. He calls it kukiyakia. It's a Shona word, and also it actually means hustle, like in English, hustle. You engage in different endeavors, both legal and illegal, to survive. That is where, for instance, you get a ghetto youth who survives on stealing. To someone outside the ghetto, that is uncouth, that is very bad, that is, or to a moralist, that is not permissible in any society as a positive trait. But in the ghetto, you will get someone saying, mwana chakabi, today you harvested well. Chakabi, that you have done so well because you were able to snatch that bag and now we can eat. And kuyiriba is in dire situations, like when there is like a thick line now. No, not a thick line. I think I should say the line is blurred between living and dying. Yes. When the line is blurred between living and dying, that is when they transition to from kuyiya to kuyiriba.
Okay.
Yes. For instance, I could talk about the addicts, those who do drugs. They will tell you that when the urge comes, someone will do anything possible to get the drug. And that can push someone from kuyiya now to kuyiriba. But what I can say maybe is that it is two-dimensional. Both kuyiya and kuyiriba has, it can be through illicit, informal, non-approved means, but it can be also through formal ways. But for the ghetto, the formal and informal is not so important. I think the informality overrides over the formal operations.
Okay, thank you very much, Milcah. I will then move on to the last chapter, conclusions and recommendations, which has, it essentially has 4 parts. One is where you provide the summary of the findings. The second, contribution to citizenship scholarship. The third, limitations, which you capture in your methodology. Then the fourth, conclusions. Yes, and I think I made a mistake. There is a fifth one. And then you have the recommendations. Now, I would like to read your recommendations, and then I'll read your recommendations, refer you to the analysis in your previous chapters, and then ask, do these recommendations address the root cause of the problem? So these are your recommendations, Milcah. There should be community-based registration. There should be a reduction. The costs should be reduced. The costs of obtaining a national identification. I think that was captured by the leader of the political party in your interview with him. And then 3, there should be a shift in societal attitude towards the ghetto. So those are your key recommendations. Now, from your analysis, from the analysis in your previous chapters, it emerges that the challenge of the slums, the challenge of the ghettos is structural. It's fundamental. Now, and at the root or at the heart of this challenge is the matter of inequality. Inequality is structural. Okay, it is structural that you have those who have and those who don't have. And in fact, this is even reflected in one of your findings, where for them the national ID is a mechanism for differentiating between mwanawani and tuli muchintu.
Yes.
Okay, so it provides the foundation for making that distinction, meaning that at the heart of the problem in the ghettos, in the slums, in the low-income areas is the matter of inequality. Okay, inequalities. Don't you think these recommendations are cosmetic? Do these address the fundamental matter of inequality, social inequality?
No, they are not cosmetic, as you mentioned, because even when the bigger or broader picture is inequalities, but we narrow it to specificities. In this case, we are looking at the national ID or the legal identification documents. So when I propose recommendations, the recommendations are actually to address that particular phenomena, which is exclusions from access to legal documentation or to legal IDs. And I think these recommendations can work.
Okay, thank you very much, Milcah. Chair, let me sum up. Number 1, I enjoyed reading this thesis. Number 2, I think it's original. Number 3, the theorization is very good. But number 4, I will comment that the theorization, the written theorization, is better than the spoken theorization. So I'll comment about that, but the theorization was just fantastic. Okay, apart from one chapter, which I've mentioned in my report. Number 4, the depth of research that Milcah did, and you can tell that it was genuine. It wasn't concocted. She brings out the landscape in these places. For anyone who wants to understand what goes on in these places, I think it's a recommended read. So overall, I think she makes a very important contribution to our understanding of whatever is happening in these places. There's something I forgot regarding methodology. I think she does not understand what positionality means, because for her, positionality meant disengaging herself from the research settings, that she was finding a challenge cutting the umbilical cord she had created with those she was interacting with. But actually, positionality means what is the conflict of interest in you doing this research. Okay, that's what it means. Conflict of interest, not the how you disconnect with those who was telling one of them that ofunyeyo kademo akapya, because there was one of those comments that some of them mistook you for being a new catch by one of the I think it goes beyond that. I found that very, very interesting. Now those who thought one of the ghetto boys, I don't know whether one of those who was shown in the picture had got kademo akapya, and you mentioned it in your, these are not my words, I think you remember, they are in the dissertation. Yeah. So overall, I think you've done a very good job, but of course I will mention that the yes, the spoken is good, but I think the written is by far better. I rest my case, Chair. Thank you very much.
I think our critical reader deserves a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Butime, for walking Milcah through her work. And thank you, Milcah, for clarifying the issues that Dr. Butime raised. Okay, we are doing very well in terms of time and in terms of the conversation. I would now like to come to the panelists. And I'm going to suggest that as the panelists engage the student, maybe we can have our tea served. And so, I'm looking, I sort of, okay, so may I, Dr. Rachel Dungu, because she's online, and sometimes our internet can decide to become crappy. So I'm going to request that Dr. Rachel Dungu goes first, and then we'll come to Dr. Muhammad Lunyago here present. So Dr. Dungu.
Thank you very much, Dean. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. I will straight away congratulate Milcah. It was a wonderful read. I will already say that I was the intern examiner. I gave comments, and interestingly, most of the comments have been addressed by you, Milcah. Thank you very much. I have a few issues that are still not coming out clearly that I'll mention. Of course, I have two questions to ask you, but there are still two issues that I asked you to work on, and you have not really incorporated those comments. Maybe, I don't know why, but maybe when you think through with your supervisors, you should be able to decide whether you want to do it or not. One, the first question is about linking your theory to the contextual relevance of your work. And then two, this is a question that I want you to respond to. How do the youth embody citizenship in mundane acts of belonging or reflection, even without formal status? Respond to this later. And then the other question that I want to talk about is your theoretical and methodological gap is still not coming out clearly. And then a section that I think should have come just before the end is your policy implications or your contributions to the ministry. Policy contribution to the ministry needs to come out clearly. And then something that I asked you to work on was about strengthening empirical grounding with updated evidence. Bring out the evidence to strengthen your empirical grounding. And then another thing that I asked you to work on was to enhance your theoretical and historical grounding, nuance legal formal versus lived experiences. Somewhere you reference to indigeneity and groups like the Maragoli. This is noteworthy. However, you might want to build further by framing how legal provisions collide with lived realities. And then finally, if you have to write my language, Luganda, write it rightly, because somewhere you said endanga muntu. I think the word is endanga muntu and many more others. So please look at the Luganda words that you write and ask someone to help you get the right wording. Otherwise, it was a wonderful read for me because I read everything. Your writing was good and I commend you for this. I congratulate you. But please respond to these two questions, and I hope that you will respond in writing all the issues that I gave you in my comments as an intern examiner. Thank you so much. Back to you, Dean.
Thank you, Doctor. The question on how the ghetto youth embody formal citizenship, even when they lack legal recognition. Did I get it right?
Yes.
Is that what you asked?
Yes.
Yes. So when I explain in the Constitution, a citizen is not only given rights, but he has duties and responsibilities in order for them to be like fully recognized citizens. And these youth, sometimes they do what we call bulunjibwansi, like general cleanups of their area. And how this happens is they think, or ideally it should be the duty of KCCA to clean the city, the entire city space, but they rarely reach the ghetto areas because of narrow roads that go down there. So those the trash collectors, the vehicles that are meant to collect the trash, never reach the ghetto space, and in the end, the ghetto residents themselves take it upon themselves to do the cleaning. But for them, when they do the cleaning of the streets, the duty that the state should have done, they feel that they are more of legal citizens than even those that don't do such. So I can say that is one of the ways. And then the other question about linking theory to, may I hear it again? I'm not sure I wrote the right question. Doctor, please. I think she's off, or I don't know.
Dr. Dungu?
Oh, the question was about linking theory to contextual relevance of your study. How is this theory relevant to your study?
Yes, it is, because the theory, lived citizenship, provides the framework within which to look at this inequality, the exclusions. For instance, the affective gives you an extra angle to look at citizenship beyond the normal framework or the normal framing, the legal conventional framing. Because when you look at citizenship as something that citizens are deeply emotional about, it becomes quite different from when you have legal recognition and you carrying that document and you take it, for instance, for granted that you have the rights. So that's why I said, like from the start, that this study makes explicit, like it brings out clearly some components of citizenship in the everyday practices, you know, and experiences of citizens that you can hardly get from the legal framework. Did I answer the question?
You will have to have these explanations in your work. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Dungu. May I now invite Dr. Mohamed Lunyaga to Farouk. Yes, Farouk insists you have to come here. Because the camera is not mobile.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Milcah, for this wonderful work, and congratulations so far. So, can I ask all my questions, then you respond, or I ask one and you respond at a time?
All the questions.
Okay.
I'll try to capture them.
I will begin from a very basic one. So, for a PhD thesis, there has to be a central argument, which we can call the thesis argument, that you build through the thesis. So the rest of the pages that you have, many of them are building that argument. So for the benefit of those that may not have read the dissertation, I would like you to speak to your central argument. Then second, so in parts of the dissertation, the thesis, you talk about experiences of women, of course, and men and others in accessing national IDs, perhaps, and the challenges they face of not having. I would like to hear if, from your findings, there were very particular gendered implications of certification and identification. This is because when national IDs are introduced, they become a basis for accessing particular opportunities, including employment, doing particular businesses and others. And in moments when certain people who did not get the IDs could not find such, the assumption is they have lost means of, but still they and their families, close friends and relatives have to survive, right? So there emerges a particular question of how these communities socially reproduce themselves. So did you find particular gendered implications of identification and certification? Third, the articulation of the ghetto youth, of the introduction of national IDs as modes of certification and identification, is that they are tools of surveillance, governmentality, control, and others. That's very clear in your work. And when you come to our recommendations, going back to the question that the opponent asks, you seem to say, okay, maybe let's ease the process such that they can have IDs, right? Let's ease the process. But even when the youth seem to accept to get national IDs, it doesn't mean they have suspended their fears about the national IDs. How then do we ensure that, how do we deal with certification and identification in ways that do not entrench such modes of governmentality, surveillance, in ways that perhaps do not entrench those inequalities, right? So we very well know that the modern state, in all its character and perhaps form, survives on the polarization of society. There has to be the very poor, the marginalized, and the rich. The Muslims must be fighting with the Christians or the Pentecostals and others, right? So how, this is based on your recommendations, right? Let's make sure that we ease the process. How then do we ensure that, well, people can identify, they are certified, but without entrenching these differences as a basis of accessing opportunities, resources, political belonging, and others, but also without erasing particular differences? Because I will not stop being a Muganda, and this is the logic that works in the ghetto. They don't see you as a Muganda or a Msoga or a Munyankole and others. So how then do you ensure that that process does not erase that, but does not entrench it as a basis of accessing resources or being certified? I thought you would draw on the logic in the ghetto of saying, well, when you are a ghetto citizen, you are a ghetto citizen forever, you never cease. And the national ID expires. They had issues with that. Your recommendations do not actually speak to this very fundamental question, right? Because the idea is perhaps the state is doing this to ensure that it continues defining you as a citizen after particular moments in time. When your ID expires, we have to reassess your worth being a citizen. I thought this has to be one of those core recommendations, drawing on the logic that operates in the ghetto. You don't have to cease being a citizen. Perhaps the national ID has to be open. So, and lastly, many ghetto youth, maybe not only ghetto youth, many people actually, including those that are not in the ghetto, use IDs as collateral. There has been a huge talk around it. You write about it in your dissertation. So I wonder if you could speak to this, place it perhaps in the broader political economy of Uganda, but perhaps also globally, where in the neoliberal dispensation, almost everything has been commodified and financialized. Does this have to do with the broader logic, or is it the conditions forcing the people to say, okay, we can actually take the national IDs and get a loan? Is this, are the ghetto youth responding to a broader, through saying, okay, we can use it to fight the inequalities that you're causing, to get loans, or to resist perhaps such, right? The idea of we can use IDs to get loans. Is it a resistance to particular forms of capitalism, especially financialized capitalism, where everything is seen as a commodity and an asset through which they can get money? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Doctor, for those questions. I'll start with the last one. I'm not sure that the ghetto youth are even so much well versed with the capitalism and all that. From my empirical findings, For them, it's all about survival. And you use all tools available in your reach to find the next meal. So if that ID will allow you access a loan, maybe to start hawking and earn a living, then that is the tool available. But yes, there is this notion also that vulnerability pushes people to the ghetto. So when you think about it broadly, it captures the elements of the capitalism, you know, structural adjustment policies and what they did, you know, also policing of the poor, because they are looked at as a threat. The poor are looked at as a threat, so the rich must be protected from the poor. So I think you are right, but in the ghetto context, it may not necessarily be the case. The tools of surveillance. Yes. Instead of looking at like easing the process and them accessing the ID, and you're saying that that cannot take away the entrenched inequalities. But at the moment, what can be done within the legal identification sphere? Because it's true that among the ghetto youth, there are those who have the IDs, but they don't even see what the IDs have done for them. And there are those who don't even wish to get the ID. They prefer to remain invisible. But there are also those who say the ID has helped me do ABC, has helped me connect to the world because I was able to register my SIM card. And you cannot use a phone without a SIM card. You need to buy data. So there is like a general agreement that the ID is important, but not necessary for survival in the ghetto. So I think and I believe that the recommendation as I proposed can help narrow the gap and remove the current exclusions, glaring exclusions in the legal identification. The gendered implications of ID. Yes, they are there. For instance, if a male lacks an ID, his life may not be as difficult as for a female who lacks an ID. Because females are looked at as caregivers. They have that strong connection even to their children. You need an ID, for example, to have your child register for their own birth certificate as a foundational document. So an ID is used to acquire other important documents. And for females, sometimes, like in the ghetto, there are female-headed families whereby she is the man and she is the woman. She needs to acquire education for the, yes, like female-headed families of single mothers, that's what I mean. Oh, yes. So she needs to acquire education for the child. And without an ID, you cannot have a birth certificate, and without a birth certificate, that child will not have access to education or do exams. So there are those implications. But also the practices at the acquisition point. There are some women, for example, who are Muslims, and they feel so uncomfortable with unveiling and putting your eyelids and putting your head up front. So that has, in a way, stopped some from going for the IDs. They will say if she's married, she will tell you that I'll use my husband's ID for the rest of the things, including registering a SIM card. And then the central argument. So this entire thesis, going through it, finally, I came to the like after analysis and everything, to the central argument that the introduction of the national ID in Uganda has intensified marginalization of the vulnerable poor on the fringes of the city, like for example the ghetto youth, by classifying and categorizing citizens into different stratas of the deserving, those who just go and get an ID whenever they want without hurdles, the less deserving, those who get the ID but they cannot use it to access their citizenship rights, and the non-deserving, those who are denied completely and deprived of the document. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milcah. And before I call the next panelist, I would like to acknowledge Professor Amanda Hammar. Professor Amanda, are you there? Okay. All right. So maybe we'll get her to say hello to us at the end. And I'm now going to invite Dr. Resti Naiga. But as she comes, I think I'm going to ask Milcah to project her recommendations, because a number of questions are coming from the recommendations. And just building on what Mohammed asked about the recommendations. So one is that you want the process to be eased. And yet here you're saying that, yes, IDs are important, but they're not really necessary for survival in the ghetto. And I think that what Mohammed is saying is that maybe that is then not the most critical thing. And if the most critical thing is inequality and survival, and you're saying they should, okay, so that first one, to enhance the accessibility, affordability, and user-friendliness of identification process. Yeah, you could go on up to the end. And maybe the question is that from your study, is that the biggest problem? Is that like the most critical, is that the most critical thing? Especially when you tell us yourself that actually some of them don't want to get IDs for the different fears that they have, and that people can actually survive without the IDs in those places. I'm not saying respond to me, but think about it as Dr. Resti comes to ask her questions.
Thank you, Milcah, for sharing your work this morning and for being very confident. And I congratulate you for getting this far. I think I've listened to your work several times, and most recently on Friday. I want to begin from probably the last statement, the less deserving, denied, and deprived of the IDs. I would like to know, they have all the requirements for the IDs, but they are denied and deprived. But you did not take me through the requirements for an ID, so I wouldn't know. So you didn't in your background take us through what the requirements for an ID, for me to understand whether they are denied and deprived, and why would they be denied when they meet all the requirements. I said this because the dissertation will be online for everybody to access. And more importantly, I think Professor Asiimwe made sure that he did a very good back. I remember we were in this room at one time with someone in charge of this from Internal Affairs, and she's interested in reading this, and we want to make sure that we don't write wrong things, because IDs are very, very important. So we should guard against that. We should take her through, even if you don't take her through now, but in your work, let us know what are the requirements, quote the policies and the regulations, so that when we can appreciate that they are actually denied and deprived. That's, I begin from that end. You said that without an ID related to this, these were small statements that means a lot, especially for something that is going to be out there about the national IDs, that without an ID, you don't get a birth certificate. I'm a mother of 4. I have their birth certificates. I was never asked about their ID. All I did, if you were born in the hospital, you take what you are given in the hospital. They give you that. It's what you take to NIRA that you get that sheet from the hospital. It's what you take to NIRA that they give you. They didn't ask me for my national ID or their father's national ID. So for me, I've not experienced that. Even a child born outside Uganda is that you not only need to take them to NIRA, their documentation to NIRA, they register them in birth outside Uganda, and NIRA gives you a letter recognizing that this child was born outside Uganda and stating their date of birth and where they were born, and that's what you use as their birth certificate. They don't get birth certificate from NIRA, but they get that letter from NIRA stating that they were born outside Uganda, their father, their mother, and the date they were born. That is, so we want to be sure these small things, this means a lot. You don't need, for me, my experience at least, I didn't need to produce an ID in order to get a birth certificate. And if someone is born home, not hospital, is the LOC. The LOC gives you, there is a local council birth certificates. It's what you take to NIRA. I didn't see an interplay of, I don't want you to explain some of these things, but I want to be sure that you document correctly so that we don't. So, I want to also talk about, I want to begin with the title before I come to these recommendations. Ethnography in the title. What was the purpose of this word, ethnography? Ethnography. The intimacies. What purpose did it? Because I would imagine that is something related to the methodology. If you have explained how you used the ethnography in the methods, or how ethnographic your methods were, what does it serve in the title? So we could look at redundant words in our, so I had issues of that concept of ethnography and intimacies in the title. But leaving that alone, I want to still talk about what Dr. Nyago talked about. The 2 things that he talked about, but I want to probably talk about them differently because they are really very key to this PhD. The purpose of a PhD is to add knowledge to existing knowledge. He asked about the central question, but for me, given the debates that we see globally, nationally, and internationally about citizenship, what is the debate that you will try to contribute to in the contemporary knowledge of citizenship? What is the debate that you try to contribute to in this? So you may write and you can to answer. Another thing that he hinted on that I also has been bothering me is youth in the ghetto, a homogeneous group. Talk about youth. Is it a homogeneous group? To me, the youth also differ by sex, that is gender, but also age and class. And you talked about how even in the ghetto they are rich and poor, meaning that there is a class even in the ghetto. So are they a homogeneous group? Do they face these challenges the same way? Does that matter? Was it an area that we could really elaborate and contribute new knowledge to this? I also want to explain about the methods. I don't want to go to the details. The critical reader talked about them, but for me, what was outstanding for me is that, okay, the primary respondents were the youth. But you also talked about validity and reliability as something that you tried to do through triangulation. But I didn't see evidence that you had also gone further to talk about, to engage key organizations such as NILA, Internal Affairs, to also listen to their story. Because you said about that the truth is subjective. So did we also hear their voices as far as these youth in the ghetto were concerned, or we did not? And that gives me to a key question. If you were to write a policy brief from this work, whom would you address it to? Because if I don't see NILA, Internal Affairs, I would wonder whom would you give this policy brief? And by the way, I hope you wrote one. So, I want to also now talk about recommendations. Recommendations should come from your key findings, your analysis, but these recommendations seem to be generic, something that didn't really come organically from your analysis. And they don't seem to be actionable. If you are given the role of this policy maker, what exactly would you do? Would you just do awareness and sensitization towards attitude, about attitude that requires for awareness and sensitization, or counseling? I don't know. What would you exactly do? They are not actionable, but they also make, for me, most important, as I told you, that a PhD aimed to create new knowledge. They don't come from your analysis. They seem generic. What was your contribution to policy and practice? That takes me to the last question. What is new with your work? What would I miss if you didn't go to the ghetto to carry out this study? What would I miss with your work? Contribution, new knowledge. I submit, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naiga. Okay, so I want to try to get to Professor Amanda again.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I didn't unmute myself fast enough, but thank you for inviting me to say hi to everybody and to express my appreciation to Makerere, to Chus, to all of you who are there, and to the incredibly thorough examiners, the critical opponent. It's really exciting to hear so many of you so deeply engaged with Milcah's work. And of course, I want to thank you, Milcah, for doing this work and engaging so substantially and thoroughly over the last many years that we've been together. So I didn't realize, and I don't expect that this is my role is not to ask Milcah questions. I have been a supervisor along with Dr. Asiimwe and Dr. Esuruku. So it's more an appreciation, but I do want to say something very briefly about Milcah's contribution to our overall project with it, which is the Citizens Project, Certifications of Citizenship in Africa. She was part of the Uganda team, which was coordinated, led by Dr. Asiimwe, Professor Asiimwe, really wonderful team that we had, including others, Martin Bohamiso, who's defending next week as well, and part of a bigger team with Ghanaian and Danish scholars as well. And what is really important about Milcah's work is we framed this Citizens Project in what we call different levels. So the sort of the intimate level, and I'll come back to that in a moment, was Milcah was one of several scholars within the project who took on this intimate level, meaning the significance of changes in national ID reforms and regimes, in this case in Uganda. What did those, or have those changes meant for, at the individual level, and we called it the intimate level, and Milcah is part of working on this notion of intimacies of identification. We've discussed it a bit, and it is a theoretical field, you could say, or conceptual space that we are working on, I think, collectively, which she has made a very, very important contribution to. So just to say that there was this intimate level, we talked about an intermediate level, which is about the bureaucracies and the materialities of changes to the national ID systems other scholars in the research have dealt much more directly with the bureaucracies, the institutions. We talked about the national level, which was more around politics, political economies policies that have changed at the national level. And our fourth dimension was a transnational, international, how global discourses of national IDs and digitalization of IDs and biometricization have affected and worked in a sort of dynamic way between the so-called global and national. So Milcah's contribution has really been important. She's taken one dimension. Of course, there are many, many spheres, spaces, actors where the intimate could have been explored and have been explored also in the Ugandan context with particular ethnic communities, Maragoli and Banyarwanda, by two other scholars, Dr. Asiimwe and Dr. Wolf. So I just want to appreciate very much that Milcah has gone into one particular urban space, a ghetto space. Of course, it's been unpacked by her in its various dimensions, but also all these fantastic questions that have been posed to Milcah by the various commentators and discussants and examiners will help all of us, not just Milcah, in finalizing the thesis, but all of us in opening out, deepening these kinds of questions, which we had hoped that citizens would open up. And Milcah has also, I want to say, been engaged not only in the Ugandan context, but in dialogue, in discussion with Ghanaian colleagues, and also in a more international context, not only across the continent, but especially on the continent, but also with others working elsewhere. So this is really by way of a deep appreciation to Milcah for her work and the contribution that she's made to a bigger scholarship and set of debates around how IDs and changing national ID systems in a very global context that is promoting hyper-centralization and hyper-technologization, let's say, making more digital and biometric. In this context, who is being affected in what ways at a very individual level, which has significance for a nation and for a state? And I just want to thank her again and thank all of you for the opportunity to support Milcah in this process, this really important scholarly process. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Hammar. Okay, and we're still proceeding with examination. So you hear more comments. Yes, so Milcah, you respond to.
Yes, the question of requirements for access to a national ID. I'll just say that according to ROPA, that is the Registration of Persons Act 2015, they clearly, the policy clearly states, this policy document, it clearly states that all Ugandans who are adults, should be above the age of 18. I know it will come as a question that why are they now enrolling those before 18? So above 18, that is according to our constitution, but also what ROPA talks about, are eligible to national identification. And it's a government policy that we all have to register. So that takes us back to why the ID is important even for the ghetto youth, because it is a government policy and all adults should have it. Though in their everyday lived realities, it is not necessary for survival. And about the acquisition of a birth certificate without an ID, I have not heard of any case, because simply because the birth certificate is linked to the parent's NINI number, and you can only access a NINI number from the national ID. So if it happened with a doctor, I don't know, but from my findings, the claim is that you must have a national ID where the NINI number is taken from in order for your child to have a birth certificate, because the two are linked. And the national ID, by the way, is just a foundational document that is required for even other vital documents, such as the driving license or even the passport. You cannot have any of those documents without a national ID. So that is why I stated what I stated. And what the debate is trying to contribute to, I think Prof. Amanda mentioned some. I don't know whether I should go through it again. So what the debate contributes to, or is all about, well, it brings to light the exclusions, inequalities that that have come with the introduction of the national ID and other IDs that affect the vulnerable. And maybe some of these have been talked about, but not in Uganda's context, in our own context, and within the ghetto space, or about the ghetto youth. Evidence of engaging with key organizations. Here I will say I did not go to NERA to carry out my field work or research, because that was out of scope. But sources of data are many, and sometimes we even rely on secondary data. For instance, I could access information from the NERA website. Like I had set prompts, whenever something new came up, I would check it. That's how I was able even to know about the revised new figures or costs for ID, change of particulars, or renewal. No, renewal doesn't attract any fee, apparently, and replacement. So I was able to engage with data from NERA by looking at the website and what is published there. Recommendations, not from analysis. I'll just say a big no. These recommendations are actually from the analysis and from the data that I displayed. The findings revealed, for instance, that there were challenges arising as a result of limited resources or finances. In a sense that for you to register for a national ID at present or during the time of my fieldwork, you need to travel to the center where they are registering from. There are no centers in the ghetto. And some of these youth don't even have mere transport. What you look at as 1,000 note is a commando and a day's meal for one of the ghetto youth. So they will tell you that instead of spending my money for transport, lining up, and I end up not even getting the ID. This is so intensive, resource intensive in terms of time, because that time I would be hawking my merchandise on the street and earning something. It is resource intensive in terms of money. I need transport back and forth to register, but also to go and collect. But also there were highlights of corruption. Like they ask, there are brokers waiting. If you want the process to be faster, pay something. And indeed it has worked for some. So there is that feeling for those who have not yet gotten the ID that without money, things cannot work faster, or you are excluded. So in my recommendations, I'm just using this one example to show that it came from the analysis. I recommend that the process gets eased, but also the fee that is charged. The fee that is charged in case the ID gets lost, that is another issue. In this informal space, chances of losing an ID are high because the ghetto youth rarely have a permanent address. They are always on the move from one place to another. So it's Today they have an ID and they have lost it in the process of shifting to another place. And then someone is asked to pay 200,000, which for them is money enough for accommodation and other day-to-day demands. So if I recommend that the fee should be revised, reduced, or even removed for the vulnerable, definitely that is linked to the findings and even to the analysis. Okay, what would I miss? What would I miss if I did not listen to this? Yeah, I would say you would miss on the deeper insights from the personal accounts of the vulnerable people on what is actually happening with the new legal identification systems in Uganda. With or without the ID, what happens to you as a person, especially as a vulnerable person, or marginalized in this case? I think that is all.
Okay, thank you, Milcah. I am still waiting for everybody to get convinced that they are all misreading the recommendations. But may I now invite Dr. Tivasima to ask his questions.
I promise to ask nothing on recommendations. Milcah, congratulations upon this. And one of the reasons I love this is you dared a design few of us dare, ethnography. And I must applaud you for that. Two things before I ask my questions is whether you really used an exploratory design or if you used an ethnographic design, because your title seems to show ethnography. And that's one of the questions I had to ask before I ask my other questions. But the other one is, are you aware of Luyaye as language? Have you read on Luyaye as language? Because there's a lot of work on Luyaye as language, interestingly done in this university. So I was reading things you were writing and I was thinking, where is Namialo in this work? Because she's done a lot of work on Luyaye, both as culture, identity, but also as language. So you probably want to do a little bit of finding out about it in a better way. Now, I have a few questions, and once I'm done, I'll get back to my seat. So on page 6 of your work, you said something that amazed me and I found quite strange. So you say, let me just look. So you say in the very last paragraph, the ghetto depicts sharpened boundaries between the outcast category and the surrounding population by deepening the social-cultural differences between them. Okay? Sharpened boundaries. In essence, those boundaries are clear. Right? And I see at some point you talk of Foucault in your work. Right? Pardon?
Yes.
And you know Foucault's discipline and punish?
Yes.
You know the way he talks about boundaries? Does Foucault ever talk about sharpened boundaries? And then, when it comes to page 13, you say, in general, this begs for acknowledgement of the fluidity of the term ghetto. You're talking of sharpened boundaries, And now you're talking of fluidity of the term ghetto. And I am confused. That's the first thing I wanted to ask. So maybe I want you to tell me, what is it about these sharpened boundaries and then fluid identities? Do they really work hand in hand, or are you presenting us something else? Secondly, on page 60, you say, this research employed a mixed methods approach. That got me happy, because then I started wondering, ethnography, mixed methods approach. I didn't understand that. And then you say, okay, so you say this research employed a mixed methods approach, drawing on the insights of Amit. I don't know if that is Amit. I need to really find out that Amit person. And I say it because I know there is something that we use a lot in this university. I don't know whether you wanted to make us okay, Amit is there. Who argues that ethnographic research, particularly in dynamic settings, often necessitates diverse methodologies. Is a mixed method approach the same as diverse methodologies? Are you talking about multiple methods of research, or are you talking of a mixed methods approach? The other problem, of course, I had with your work, and I know that you've said this, but I'm still failing to understand it. Part of what we do with ethnographic studies is that we get ourselves immersed in the community. Not so. That means that we cease being non-participant observers, because everything that's going on in the environment and the community is something that we have chosen to immerse ourselves in. We have gone in fully, okay? And so I didn't understand it, and I heard it and I thought, okay, maybe I got this wrong. I didn't understand it when you said you keep certain things to memory and then you go write them, because ethnography would not allow for such unless I've been trained in a different ethnography. So that's something you want to think about, because I ask here, so you used both participant and non-participant observation. Why did you use both? And yet in an ethnographic research, you should actually be immersed into your work. 2 more questions and I'll be done, I promise. Page 111. Now, I am an identities scholar. I need to state this just in case. And you talk about the binaries between government construction of citizenship and lived citizenship. I love your understanding of lived citizenship. It's amazing. It's something that you got from the communities that you work with. But I'm wondering, how do the two sides of citizenship construction reconcile? And do they ever reconcile anyway? And I'm thinking about this in light of the fact that the formal or the political kind of citizenship and the informal, for me, kind of present interesting ways in which identities can be both constructed but also negotiated. Okay? And I don't know, and maybe you can help me to understand this, I don't know whether you think about the idea of the fact that even in the way we construct citizenship and nationhood and belonging is an aspect that is dynamic. It's a continuous conversation. I don't know whether for you it is fixed or if it's a continuous conversation. And if it is continuous, then how does it work within the ghetto system vis-a-vis the national system? My final question, and this comes from your engagement with the opponent. So you talk of Uganda as a nation state. Okay. You also say that Uganda has the same heritage thanks to colonialism.
Shared heritage. History.
History.
Oh, yes.
Okay. You also know that colonialism actually dismantled this state.
Yes. That's
you also know that because of the construction of Uganda as a colonial state, we have problems about so many things compared to what you see in Lesotho. You see that? Why I'm asking this is that you seem to be drawing on Benedict Anderson's conceptualization of the nation. The problem with that, and I want you to think about it and maybe give us an answer, does it really work for African states? does it even work for Uganda? Because one of the troubles we have in this country, and this of course affects belonging, is what we call subnationalism or ethnic nationalism. Okay? How does that sometimes play also in these different constructions of citizenship? And if it plays in those different constructions of citizenship, how do the people in the ghetto then reconcile themselves to their belonging to the state? Because like I said, and I don't know what you're going to tell me, that conversation about belonging is one that never stops. It's a continuous conversation. Now, one thing I want to say, and you can take me on this because I promise I can do it. If you work on this work and give it to Makerere Press, and I know Pamela is here, I'm going to say this. This is beautiful work, and I promise this is work we will be willing to take. But that's on condition that you do what we are telling you to do. Okay? And I say that because I love the way you deal with something that is central to our existence as a country. And I find that interesting because we struggle a lot about where we belong and how we negotiate this belonging and identity. And it's something that for me is quite interesting to think about. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Very important questions, and some I promise I'll reflect on them deeply thereafter, but others I'm answering right now and right here. So the Luyaye language, yes, that was a comment. I have not read any literature on Luyaye apart from what I gathered empirically and what I displayed as the common words. And I promise I'll look for the literature and I'll try to utilize it as it should. Data, yes. There was about a question of mixed methods. That was a mistake. I just accept. It was meant to be data collection methods and not mixed methods. I will check back and organize that. And then about the total immersion and non-participant observers. I mentioned this in light of a tool like observation checklist, which clearly speaks of where you have been, what you have been observing or the activities involved in. So I was looking at like the context of what you are involving in, when and where. If, for example, I am observing at the same time participating, which is the ideal, it would be, because the question was about when you write the notes while in the field and when you write off the field in maybe after field work. So that is how it came about. But also when I talk of acting as a non-participant, it depends on what you're doing, and I gave a clear example on that. You cannot be actively, no, rather you cannot be observing and writing stationed in one place and consider yourself as an active observer, like rather as part of the activity. I'll give an example. I acted as a passive observer in a ghetto, in an event which was organized purely and exclusively for the ghetto, which was dubbed the Ghetto Talent event, organized by the Presidential Advisor on Ghetto Matters. And whatever they were doing, really, I could not participate. I had no way of indulging in it. So I had to sit on the side, observe as I take notes. So Yeah, that is what I can say. And then how to reconcile the legal and the informal, these two binaries. I would say actually there is even no need, because this study, the way it was structured, it broadly looked at the notion of citizenship, both as legal but also as substantive. And these two coexist. There is an interplay. There are overlaps. So there is no need to look at them as a binary, like to say clearly this is legal citizenship separate from lived or active as far as an individual is concerned. I think so. Maybe I need to revisit my work and be sure.
So I need to see that it's not a binary relationship. It's a relationship that sometimes is very seamless, and yet sometimes is very contested.
And that doesn't come out anyway. So I'll revisit that. Yes. The idea that citizenship is continuous construction, that's true. It has evolved. That's why even in my framing, I look at how it has evolved over time and space. So where we are today, maybe tomorrow or in future, the construction or the interpretation and meanings attuned to the citizenship will be different. And I agree. Uganda as a nation state, I'll think about this critically. Maybe I had, yes.
The sharpened boundaries with identity.
Yes, the sharpened boundaries vis-a-vis fluid identity. I talk of the sharpened boundaries because boundaries can be both physical, but they can be also imaginary, like mental constructs. So as I was doing field work, I interviewed some police officers, and they would outrightly tell you that, those Bobi Wine's people, those Bayayi, they get. So that is actually where I based, like, to write. As I was writing, I could clearly, like looking through my work, I could clearly look at those boundaries. Not necessarily the physical, but even the mental construct, the stigmatization of the ghetto territory area from those who do not live there. It's obvious that whoever is from the ghetto is a Muyai. But when you reach there, the reality is different. And it is from the realities of the ghetto youth that the fluid identities come about. Because their identities shift as much as their belonging. I talk about multiple scales of belonging. They know that they belong to Kampala City, for example, because they are in one of the divisions of Kampala City. But just after that, they also know that they belong to Kamocha Ghetto. And they also have other inner circles that they belong to, or even a family. I hope I've answered your question, Doctor.
You certainly haven't answered his question on the sharpened boundaries, because that's why he's not convinced, especially having referenced you back to Foucault. Professor Mbabazi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations, Abasabyona, for having reached this far. I just want, these are just comments. I have a feeling that when you are doing your research, you are so much maybe touched, and somehow you fail to differentiate what is academic and what we call empathy. because listening to you, definitely someone finds that you have so much sentiments for these people who are vulnerable, disadvantaged. Who takes them there, by the way? They take themselves there. And they know that I'm not being sarcastic, actually, but this is a reality. The moment you go there, you know where you belong. So who is disadvantaging them? I don't think that they are disadvantaged, but we have a choice to make. You can decide not to go into the ghetto. And you stay in the village, by the way. So I want you, when you are writing, try to remove those sentiments. And also I find you are so much that you don't see. That one has prevented you seeing new developments, for instance, which are taking place, which Dr. Resta was talking about. It's identities, actually, the identification, they're evolving every day. And I have met many people who are working in identity cards, NILA. There are so many. They tell me new developments every day. And there's one of the students actually sponsored, Professor Asiimwe, you know, Hassan. Negba Hassan, she's writing also actual identities of these refugees. In this actual some is in it's like Kisenyi exactly. And I've been reading these things. She tells you actually the process of getting identity cards is not so hard as you think, as you are portraying. Actually, you are putting it here. It's not hard so long as you have the requirements. As Resta was telling you, that's all you need. So I wanted to ask you, you said they call them Bayai, but this is the language actually they use most of the time, the coded language. And I wanted to ask you, these people who are, what is the difference between these people they call Chifes and these people that they're calling the Bayai? Is there any difference? There is. Okay, write it. That's why I want to ask you, just write it. And another question, I find the word, actually the ghetto youth use the IDs conveniently, and I have a feeling that it can be a time bomb in terms of insecurity, at the same time a breeding ground for crime. And I think you found out that because we did a research. Actually, it is still going on, community policing, and we did everything here in Kawempe, in Kamwocha, the crime there. There is a high crime in these ghettos, in these slums. So I don't know why you are really supporting them, that it's very hard for them to get identity card. Kamwocha is just near where the Nila. It's just there. And you are saying it is resource consuming when you can even walk there. Please, I want you to take it from academic point of view. Just don't, you filter whatever they are giving. You don't just take it on wholesale. Someone failing to walk up to there, just come what is near. It's just near this Nila where they are doing it. So get it right, that inconvenience is also time bomb for insecurity in Uganda, and crime actually thriving there. So another question is, some critics argue that word terms like ghetto and citizenship are problematic and loaded. How did you address this critique in your research? Another question is, maybe I'm very fast. Another question is, in what ways could your research methodology, everyone is talking about your research methodology, actually it is problematic. I wanted to know how long would you live there in Kamwocha? Did you stay there? Yes. Okay. And can it be replicated? How, to what extent your research methodology can be replicated for other marginalized youth population? And the last question is, how did you balance the agency? You have talked about agency, ghetto agency youth, with structural constraints they face. How did you balance the agency, ghetto youth, with structural constraints they face? Thank you.
The last question. So, no, the last question about balancing agency, and I missed that, I think. I wanted you to repeat the question.
Okay, my question is, how did you balance agency, ghetto youth, the agency, you have talked about it actually,
Yes,
when you are presenting, with the structural constraints they face?
Okay, balance in terms of writing, or because was I supposed to balance it? I am. The
Their
question is not
agency,
clear.
that energy, how did you balance? In other words, actually, how did you? If you don't understand it, leave it. It's okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. The ghetto youth use IDs conveniently, and this can be a source of insecurity. That's true, and I think I write about it in my work. But also we look at the other side of the coin. It can be a source of insecurity. No, like it can be a source of insecurity for one to lack an ID. Because when you do not have a national ID, you are legally dead to the systems of government. You are non-existent. Your data is not captured anywhere, and even if the government wanted to look for you, they would not get you. And that can actually be a space or a room that can easily be exploited by those with sinister motives. That's why I also referred to some youth who deliberately choose not to register. And the police usually hunts them, but there are also those who want to register, but they are affected by these structural inequalities. Yes, we don't pay. But now I come to the structural issues, the hurdles. There are also what they call systemic errors, like machine failure, for instance. Some youth have gone to register. I have practical examples, but their thumbprints could not be, rather their fingerprints could not be captured because it is a general problem, but the implications are different for the ghetto youth and for the person outside there. Yes, so I was going to give that example whereby the fingerprints fail because they are mostly engaged in manual labor. They belong to the informal sector. These are youth who just carry things, who do, I don't know, lots of, yes, they are porters, they carry things for others, and yes, for them, the reason they give is that their fingerprints are not soft enough to be captured. Well, so then it is a general problem, machine error. But the implications are different when you look at specific people and the contexts within which they operate. So the difference between Chifesi and Bayai. Now, when you talk of Chifesi, that clearly is to a negative, like it has negative connotations both in and outside the ghetto. Actually, even the ghetto, they will refer to someone as tending towards Chifesi. But for the ghetto, it has both positive and negative connotations. For someone outside the ghetto or someone who is not privy to what happens and not interacting with them or not seeing what happens there, will have a different perception of of the bayaye. But for themselves, actually bayaye is a word that has many positive connotations, such as the ability to navigate around, to survive on your own, being strong, being, so for them, being a muyai is actually a good thing. I think I quote it somewhere in my work. So, no, of course, it depends on who says it and where they say it. Yes, the context matters. Identification evolving each day. Yes, that's true. And initially, some of the youth were inquiring why there is an expiry date to the national IDs, yet citizenship should not expire, especially citizenship by birth. But within the ghetto still, there are agents or brokers, those who help others to acquire IDs. And for them, they have information because they are in close relationship and in close communication with the officials that work on the IDs. So they mentioned that they tell the ghetto youth, or they explain to them whenever they need IDs about the ID of expiry, that the new features that were put in the new biometric, machines required that we register, because previously they could not capture the iris scan. But now the biometrics have changed. The demand for data, like personal data in form of biometrics, is different. It has shifted. So I acknowledge and accept that identification evolves, over space and time, like it changes. I agree with that. So much attached to empathy, remove sentiments. Okay.
But I think that there was a great mistake that we did not engage people cleaner. That was a very grave mistake. You cannot work on the citizenship identities and you never succeed. That's why you have these gaps. Don't what the new developments are taking place. And actually, as someone who is very patriotic, when you live abroad, you feel you want to be patriotic. Because don't put information out there that is not right. Let's just portray ourselves. There is bad things there, but let's get the right thing.
All right. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you, Milcah. I'd now like to give an opportunity to the public to ask the candidate questions or make comments. Farouk, I see that there's information in the chat, so maybe it's really okay. It's just comments. All right. I'm going to count to 5 and okay, so I'm counting 1. Anybody with a question? 2, 3. I will stop there. So Milcah, I think people are satisfied with your responses. And so that brings us to the end of this phase. I would like to request that everybody else other than the panelists remain. Everybody else leaves and the panelists stay in the room. We shall call you, we shall send Dr. Farouk to call you. Please don't go very far, but also don't stay very close. So that we deliberate and pronounce ourselves. Thank you. progress. Okay. Colleagues, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Milcah. Good afternoon, Milcah. Ah, okay. I wanted to be sure that you're still able to talk. You're still able to talk. Our deliberation took a little bit longer because your work is very interesting, and we're trying to take it in different directions. First, I want to thank everybody for staying with us because this has taken a bit long. Our audience online, thank you for keeping there with us. And yes, Milcah, we have deliberated, agreed to disagree, but that is also okay. It's part of the academics. But the consensus, of course, is that you pass. Congratulations. It's exciting work. You had the comments already from the different examiners here, and I don't want to get into that. But you have issues to address. You have issues to address before we finally accept this book and forward your name to be added on the graduation list. So you will pick the comments in the interest of time, because some colleagues are really delayed. They have to run to get other things done. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to read the comments, but you'll be able to get them from Secretariat. And you have up to 3 months to address the comments. So again, it's entirely up to you. If you want to graduate, then you have to work a little harder and faster so that you submit your work at least by December. If you decide to take longer, it's entirely up to you. And so, yes, we will share the comments, and please take the comments in good faith. All members of the panel noted that, yes, it is a defense, you're defending your work, but that sometimes you defend your work to a point of not allowing for improvement of the work. And that is that might not be a very good thing. So I know we come here to defend, fight, yes, but the moments when you realize, yes, I think I had not thought about that, and I need to think a little differently about my work. So yes, the rest of the information you'll pick from Secretariat, really, and I think my job ends here. Many congratulations. You have a mic if you want to say 1 or 2 things. Otherwise, for me, my part is done. And congratulations once more. Congratulations to the supervisors. Congratulations to the Department of Development Studies. Thank you, Citizen, for mentoring, for the financial support. Professor Manda is back, so Milcah, maybe you want to say something while Professor is still there, and before Professor Asiimwe runs to his next assignment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There is nothing much that I really would like to say other than appreciation once again. I really do appreciate all people that have been part of this journey to this point, especially citizens and my supervisors, whom I also take as my mentors, but also other colleagues, and everyone that has spared time to be here for this public defense. Thank you, and thank you once again.